I think that putting on, major presentations of Indonesian culture in Australia in a way that's really going to engage Australians, that feels like a really important thing for me to do.
Welcome to another episode of the Katalis Podcast Season 3. I'm Robbie Gasper and I'm here with my co-host, Sondang Sirai.
Today we're talking about gamelan diplomacy. Now, gamelan is traditional ensemble music with origins in both Java and Bali. Now, our listeners who have visited Bali might have experienced Balinese gamelan and its beautiful rhythms and harmonies. So we're very excited to be joined by John Cheong-Holdaway today. John is a musician and the creative producer at Gamelan DanAnda, a Balinese gamelan orchestra in Melbourne. Now, Robbie, you've known John for a long time, is that right?
That's right, Sondang. I had the pleasure of meeting John back in 2016 in Bali at CAUSE Indy, or the Conference for Australia di Indonesian Youth. At that time, John was a senior economist and public policy advisor based in Jakarta. However, I'm eager to delve into his exciting new role with Gamelan DanAnda. So without further ado, let's dive into this not-to-be-missed episode.
Hi, John. It's a pleasure to have you on the Katalis Podcast. I'm almost tempted to speak to you in Bahasa Indonesia.
Terserah, Ibu.
Okay, so could you share a bit about your background and connection with Indonesia?
Sure. So my name's John Cheong-Holdaway and I'm a musician and creative producer based in Melbourne, Australia. But I've only introduced myself as a musician and a creative producer for about the last 2 years. Before that, I would have introduced myself as a policy economist. I first moved to Indonesia in 1990 with my family when my dad was working as an accountant there. But I picked up the language fairly well. And then when I moved back to Australia, I had a whole bunch of Indonesian friends. So I learned to speak Indonesian really well here. And then straight out of uni, moving to Indonesia seemed a bit more interesting than the other options. And I fell into a career in policy economics and really enjoyed that for sort of nearly 20 years. Then I moved back to Australia in 2017 and started playing Balinese gamelan.
John, it's great to see you again. We first met in 2016 at CAUSE Indy, or the Conference for Australia di Indonesian Youth. And I think on the first night we had dinner together and we sort of hit it off from the first time we sort of met. But what initially drew you to Balinese gamelan? How did you become involved with it?
It was a way for me to stay connected to Indonesia when I moved away. And also the music is really fun. Like, it's really fast and loud and beautiful, and it chops and changes on a dime, which is really satisfying. And, when we play with a jazz fusion band or when we just invite the general populace in to enjoy this beautiful music, everyone loves it because it's beautiful. It's just the case that most people haven't heard it before.
John, for our listeners who may not be familiar, could you explain the difference between Javanese gamelan and Balinese gamelan? And also you touched on fusion. Could you tell us what that is and how it blends traditional music with other genres?
Gamelan is the name for a range of Indonesian percussion orchestras. So there's the most famous ones are sort of Javanese gamelan and Balinese gamelan, but many parts of Indonesia, you've got Sundanese gamelan Cirebon. There's many sub types within Java itself, like Solo gamelan is different from Jogja gamelan and so on. But I don't know that much about Javanese gamelan. I know quite a bit about Balinese gamelan. And there's just 30 different kinds of gamelan just within Bali alone. And even within each of those 30 different kinds, there's all the different subgenres and there's new music and there's old music. But broadly, gamelan is a name for a Indonesian percussion orchestra. The things that are different about Balinese gamelan to Javanese gamelan, like if you hear something and you want to know which is which, if it's really fast and changing a lot, like it's more likely to be Balinese gamelan, especially gong kebiar, which is most of what we play. It's very energetic and really loud. And another thing that's really characteristic with Balinese gamelan is they tune the notes perfectly so that they're perfectly in tune and out of tune. So it creates this amazing shimmering effect. And it's something that they only do in Bali for some reason, and it's a really characteristic sound. And it's instantly recognizable. So gamelan fusion is something I suppose we're trying to invent our own approach for. I mean, there are bands that have done it in Indonesia for a long time. Hari Rusli in the 80s and 90s, and Krakatau with Indra Lesmana. They've been working gamelan into Indonesian music. And I'm conscious that when we do it in Australia, to try and do it in a way that speaks to where we are now. So when Krakatau were doing gamelan fusion in Indonesia in the early 1990s, everyone in Indonesia knew what gamelan was. And, in fact, they were being introduced to jazz as much as they were being introduced to gamelan. So when we do a fusion gig in Australia, I'm always careful to present a traditional piece as part of that, because most Australians have never heard gamelan.
John, could you elaborate on the concept of gamelan diplomacy and what you hope to achieve through this?
I think that gamelan is beautiful. And in my experience presenting gamelan in Australia, a lot of Australians think it's beautiful too. But there hasn't been any large-scale presentations of gamelan in Australia really since the 70s. I've done a lot of research into it, and I can't find any reference to there having been a major presentation of traditional gamelan since the Pelihatan Gong toured in the 1970s. And that seems crazy to me, because there are, as there are from any part of the world, there are amazing virtuosos and amazing composers. And this, it's not like, this is folk music that wasn't documented. No, there is traditions. Everyone knows who made these compositions. They've been there for, in some cases, 1,000 years. But many of the masters of Balinese gamelan, like Nyoman Kaler, Wayan Dibya, some of the master choreographers, Swasti Bandam, is still alive, and they're right there in Indonesia, and yet no one in Australia has ever heard of it. So I guess I got the sense through my work with Gamelan DanAnda that presenting this would be successful here. We're playing the Melbourne Recital Centre later this year with our Jazz Fusion project. There seems to be an appetite for Balinese gamelan, or for gamelan more broadly, when we present it in Australia. So, I really do see this as a platform for deeper engagement. Like, when people come to our events, they get a deep and genuine experience of engagement with something amazing from Indonesia. But I think that putting on, major presentations of Indonesian culture in Australia in a way that's really going to engage Australians, that feels like a really important thing for me to do. I really hope that when people, the next time they go to Bali, they veer off from the pathway between the hotel to the beach and try and engage with some of that incredible culture.
How do you see Gamelan DanAnda contributing to the community, both locally and also globally?
Yeah, we think a lot about sharing the platform. Like, we put together an event called the Gathering of the Gamelans last year, and we had 8 groups from 5, representing traditions from 5 different parts of Indonesia playing gamelan together. And we had about 1,000 people coming to it. And for a lot of those groups, it was actually the first time they'd been paid at all. And it's important, I guess, that we, build those bridges for other amazing Indonesian and Indonesian-Australian artists to connect with the broader community, because I think they have a lot to say that's relevant to Australia. So I think what's next for us is that we continue to build our platform, both for ourselves so that we can approach some sort of financially sustainable practice, but also like to keep introducing Australians to Indonesian culture more broadly, because there's so much, I really profoundly believe that there's no such thing as competition in this space.
Wow, John, what an amazing story. And we can't finish off without this question. It must be quite a shift going from a career in economics and public policy to becoming a full-time professional musician running an orchestra, from policy papers to music scores. So what's that journey been like? And are you excited about the future?
Yeah, I'm very excited about the future. To be honest, I don't see it as big a jump as many people seem to think it is. Like at the end of the day, economics is about value. And I see this thing that's incredibly valuable, that is beautiful and that no one knows about. So in economic terms, I call that a market failure. And my artistic practice is really rooted in my background as an economist. And, I can manage a project which is very useful as well. Like, our shows at Ausasia Festival and Brunswick Music Festival recently, we had artists flying in from Bali and from Darwin and visas to organize and all those sorts of things. One thing I really want to see as a result of my work is to see Indonesian gamelan in the top music venues in Australia. So I want to see gamelan in the Sydney Opera House. I want to see gamelan in Hamer Hall at the Art Centre of Melbourne. And I don't think that Gamelan DanAnda will be performing that music. Like community orchestras don't typically aspire to play at the Sydney Opera House. But I do think that through our work, we are creating the gamelan literacy and the platform for that to occur.
Well, John, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. It's been amazing listening to your story from that transition from economics, policy to, becoming a full-time musician. We wish you all the best for the future and we look forward to catching up again soon.
You've been listening to a conversation with musician John Cheong-Holdaway, the creative producer at Gamelan DanAnda in Melbourne. We hope you enjoyed this episode. For more on Katalis, check us out on our website, iacepa-katalis.org, or find us on social media. We look forward to your company on the next episode of the Katalis Podcast.